So we all know that Jiu-Jitsu is a sport that relies on isolating opponents' joints and putting them in compromising positions. Submissions like the Americana, the Kimura, the omoplata, are shoulder locks that attempt to put the shoulder joint at its end ranges at various angles in order to get your opponent to tap. Now, there are several things that we can do to minimize the risk of shoulder injury in this unique sport. This video is going to highlight the 3 exercise principles that I make sure I do in order to keep my shoulders healthy for Jiu-Jitsu. And hands down, the #1 most important thing is whenever you do weight training, train through full range of motion. The truth is that most of the time whenever people show me how they're lifting weights, they neglect to go through the full range of motion. Now, I'm generally pretty happy that people are weight training, given all the benefits for longevity and musculoskeletal health. However, if you do Jiu-Jitsu and you want your shoulders to be as healthy as possible, training through the full range of motion is a must. And particularly, it pays to train as close to the end range of motion as possible under load. And why is this? Think about it for a second. Let's say you get caught in the Kimura and it's really tight. Well, #1, your joint is at its anatomical end range of motion. And #2, your muscles have to contract while it's at its end range of motion to prevent it from going any further. The stronger you are at these end ranges of motion, the longer you can potentially hold off and attempt an escape. Another really good benefit is the health of your connective tissue. Think back to the days when you first started Jiu-Jitsu, particularly if you started Jiu-Jitsu after your mid-20s like I did. You remember the joints and the tendon aches that would last for days? Well, a part of the reason why this occurred is that it was very likely the first time that your muscles were 1, contracted at that length, 2, your tendons had been lengthened that far under load, and 3, that the cartilage lining those joint surfaces had experienced that much pressure from unique angles. Your muscles can recover pretty quickly from this given the amount of blood supply they have. But as you may have learned from my previous videos, your tendons and your cartilage take much longer to adapt. The way that we make sure that our joints and connective tissue adapt positively to these demands is to move under load through full ranges of motion. At first, make sure you start light and go as far as your body will let you go. And you'll notice that you're not only able to control the weight better, but over time your available range will likely increase. It isn't very often in Jiu-Jitsu that we're moving our arms over our heads or far away from our body, because if this happens, something's very likely gone wrong. So it pays to be prepared for when this happens. When doing exercises like these, folks typically like to stop way before their arms get all the way over their head. For example, you should feel a deep stretch down into your lats and in the posterior shoulder muscles at the very bottom of a lat pull down or a pull up, ensuring that your muscles have to produce force from the absolute end of your available range of motion. And the same goes for something like a dumbbell press. The deep stretch should be felt in your pecs with your chest really spread wide so that the press out is from the very bottom. Again, the stronger that you become at end range, the higher the likelihood that you'll be able to get out of these bad situations and the less sore you'll be after the fact. And I just want to be clear, this is less about the specific exercises and more about the principle. Lift through full ranges of motion no matter what lift you're doing if building healthy shoulders for Jiu-Jitsu is your goal. Now, before we get into the next topic, I'm starting to get a lot more questions than I have time to answer. A lot of them are pretty repetitive, so the ones that I see popping up a lot, I'm going to start to answer in video format. If you want to make sure it gets time to be answered thoroughly, it's better to ask me in my DMs on Instagram or via email. So start sending you guys' questions there, especially if they're longer questions, and I'll start responding in video format. Okay, the second principle is thoracic spine mobility. Let's face it, you can tell when a grappler's walking around because they very often have a very distinct posture that they've developed from being in these positions. Rounded or kyphotic thoracic spine, internally rotated shoulders, and a thick neck. And maybe throw in some cauliflower ear. And I'm not saying this posture is bad. What I am saying is making sure that you maintain the ability to move through the full available range of your thoracic spine will help your shoulder health immensely, because the thoracic spine moves in conjunction with the shoulder blade and helps control the movements of the arm. For example, let's say that I try to reach behind myself using only my shoulder in this position. My ability to reach is pretty limited. Now, let's allow my thoracic spine to move. My available range increases tremendously. Now, this is just one specific example, but now it's not hard to imagine that if we had a more mobile thoracic spine, it would help distribute the force through the entire upper quarter, rather than potentially relying on the main shoulder joint to take the brunt of the force. As the exercises roll through, take note that some of these movements are gravity assisted, against gravity, and some are even using weights as resistance. But I'm making sure to move in all available planes of motion, to include bending forwards, backwards, side to side, and rotation. Most will be focused on thoracic extension and rotation, since these are the motions I find that are most limited in folks that do Jiu-Jitsu. Now, the first rule also applies here. Move through your full available range of motion, regardless of whether the movement is weighted or unweighted. And the third principle is incorporating closed chain movements. So closed chain movements occur when the distal part of your extremity, like the hand or the elbow, is in contact with the ground and your body is moving around it. An example of this in Jiu-Jitsu would be bracing the hand down when going for a hip bump. My favorite sweep. Since we do a lot of this in BJJ, it pays to train with loads going through our shoulder joint with our hand in a fixed position on the ground. And there aren't many exercises that target this better than the Turkish get up. So the hand that I want you to focus on is the hand that's planted on the ground. Watch how the shoulder moves through a wide range of motion, but unlike some of the other movements we saw earlier, the body is being positioned around the arm instead of the other way around. Close chain movements are often a little bit more challenging, so make sure you start light, but focus on moving deliberately, and even pausing at certain points can help build resilience in the shoulder joint. Now, the Turkish get-up is just my favorite exercise for this, but again, it's the principle that matters. Incorporate close chain movements into your resistance training to help maintain a really healthy shoulder joint for Jiu-Jitsu. So to recap, when you're resistance training, make sure you're moving through full ranges of motion. Keep your thoracic spine mobile, and incorporate close chain movements occasionally into your lifting. All right, don't forget to email me or DM me with your questions. My Instagram handle is @CombatAthletePhysio, and my Gmail is combatathletephysio@gmail.com. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.